morning, everyone. Can you all hear me? Okay, just want to make sure. Just give me a thumbs up. Know that I am very, very, very casual when I do a class or a lesson. So, and I can talk. So feel free to literally interrupt me if you need to, if you have a question or something that you would like to comment on. If I don't openly give you that invitation, know that invitation is always there. So feel free to speak as you see the need or the desire. So anyway, what a lesson. I have to tell you personally, this was very apropos for me. I struggle with this quite a bit. Mainly because I'm a type A personality married to a type B personality, and it can get difficult at times trying to maneuver and recognize that my attitude, isn't static. It can be changed, and sometimes I need to change my attitude. So we're going to talk about today what attitude is, how we're supposed to have a godly attitude, how we can have the godly attitude, which is what we should be striving for. And we're going to look at some examples in the Bible of a couple of women and one gentleman in the Bible who had just an amazing attitude in their circumstances. So I want to ask you first, tell me what you think attitude is. How would you define attitude?
I was thinking sometimes it's your reaction to things that happen to you. So it's kind of like your automatic response and what that looks like, whether it be positive or negative.
Okay, correct. That it's reactory, right? It's a reaction. That's one definition. Anybody else have any other thoughts?
I think it can also kind of be your disposition, maybe, or just kind of your outlook, because I think that many times when we're around people, we know what their attitude is, right? We can see it in their body language, you can see it in their tone of voice, you can see it obviously in the words that they say as well, but just kind of the disposition that we give off, that we emit.
Absolutely. I think that's the one definition that that is most prevalent when we talk about attitude. Yeah. So it's a way of feeling or acting. It is most certainly the manner or a disposition that can be displayed by how you're feeling. It's an opinion, it's a mental state. So it's all those things. I found some interesting quotes about attitude that I wanted to share with you all, because it kind of puts things into perspective when we're talking about attitude. Winston Churchill, he was Prime Minister of UK, for those that don't know, he said, attitude is a small thing that makes a big difference. Attitude is everything, and everything is capitalized. Our attitude towards life determines life's attitude towards us. Life is 10% what happens to me and 90% of how I react to it. And your attitude, not your aptitude, will determine your altitude. And I thought that was quite telling, basically meaning that your attitude, not your abilities, determines how high or how well you progress in life. And I like this one. Bad attitude is like a flat tire. You can't go anywhere until you change it. Many things are out of control, but attitude is not not one of them. There are people who think that some things can't be changed, and that how you feel about something, or how you your opinion about something can't be changed. And I would beg to differ with them. I think that attitude is not one of those things that are out of our control. We do have some control over our attitude. I want to talk about now, I would like to discuss Esther in the Bible. We're going to talk about Esther, Hannah, and Paul, who are some just wonderful biblical examples of the right attitude. So we can find the story of Esther if you have your Bibles and you want to follow along. I don't know that we're going to read the entire scripture for time's sake, because there's a lot that I would like to discuss. So I'm just going to give a sort of a brief synopsis of each of these characters. But you'll find the story of Esther in my main points that I'm going to be discussing today in Esther 4, verses 7 through 16, excuse me. In Esther 7, verses 1 through 7. And in Esther 8, 3 through 6, and 11 through 16. So just as I said, just to kind of give you a brief summary of who Esther was, she was a Jewish female in the Old Testament, and essentially she won a beauty contest. The king there had grown tired of his queen and her disrespect, and so he had this beauty contest, excuse me, and Esther was encouraged by Mordecai, who was a relative of hers, to participate in this contest. And long story short, the king became mesmerized with her, and she became queen. But there was a gentleman in the king's court who had a problem with the Jews, and basically had a problem with their lack of respect for him, them not bowing down to him, them not worshiping him. And so he had very deviously devised a plot to destroy the Jews. Now, mind you, the king and his court, they were not aware that Esther was a Jew, or that she came from the Jewish line. And so she was told by Mordecai not to divulge that information, and in the hopes that God would be using her, as he well did, would be using her for such a purpose. And so she needed to basically stay alive so that her people would live. I do want to read portions. Let me get my Bible open here. There we go. I want to read some of this just so that you can get a quick overview. And then we're going to talk about Esther's attitude and how she reacted, how she was proactive in all this. Mordecai told him, Hathach, and Hathach was the one of the king's eunuchs. Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the sum of money that Haman, this is the gentleman who wanted to see the Jews destroyed, had promised to pay in the king's treasures to destroy the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given by the king, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and that he might command her to go into the king to make supplication to him and plead before him for her people. So Mordecai is wanting Esther to plead before the king on behalf of them. Then we read, Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you, meaning Esther, will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. So again, he's asking her to keep quiet about who she is. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Then I'm going to go to Esther 7. And I'm going to read through verses 1 through 7. The king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day at the banquet of the wine, the king again said to Esther, what is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Up to half the kingdom. It shall be done. Then Queen Esther answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss. So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, who is he and where is he who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. And then let's go to chapter 8, and we're going to read verses 3 through 6, and then verses 11 and 16, and see how this climaxed. Now Esther spoke again to the king, fell down at his feet, and implored him with tears to counteract the evil of Haman the Agagite and the scheme which he had devised against the Jews. And the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king and said, if it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and this thing seems right to the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that will come to my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my countrymen? And verses 11 through 16. By these letters, the king permitted the Jews who were in every city to gather together, protect their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the forces of any people or province that would assault them, both little children and women, and to plunder their possessions. The Jews had light and gladness and honor. Okay, so there's our story in a nutshell. In Esther, I'm trying to find the verse. There's a portion. Oh, here it is. I believe it's in Esther 4. I'm sorry, I'm escaping me, and I didn't put it on my notes. There was a portion in Esther, and if somebody knows it, please fill me in, where Esther, when she's talking to Mordecai about going to the king, she implores him and tells him, you know, that they need to go into time of fasting about this, that she doesn't care that she might die in going to the king uncalled for.
15
Yes.
and 16 of chapter 4 there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Because if you went to the king and he didn't call for you, there was a very good chance that you could die. And so she basically said, go gather all the Jews who are present, fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, nights or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and so I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So we have here a woman who was determined, even unto death, to see that justice was brought for her people. And so she had an attitude of unwavering determination. She had an attitude of devotion to God. And she had an attitude that was dauntless. She was bold and she was courageous. She, she was willing to die for the cause and for the good. And so she could have very easily, as the queen, not divulged who she was, what was happening to her people, and just sort of sat back and enjoyed, being the queen and living in royal luxury for the rest of her life. But her attitude was of sorrow for her people, and a determination to see that they were brought to justice. And so how many of us would be so bolden and brave to do something, or to have that type of attitude, where we might just as soon, I'm just going to stay out of it, keep myself safe, and be done with it. So any thoughts about Esther that struck you, or any insights that you might have had?
I did want to say, I think it's really interesting, the little part where her uncle encourages her, because she does try to tell him, look, I don't know if you guys realize, but this is the situation. And he's straight with her. He tells her exactly like it is. And she accepts, and she is bold, and she is courageous, and she does all that. And I think it's beautiful that she had that person in her life, just to, she expressed her heart to him, and he said, and now, and I think that's beautiful.
And it was also very telling that not only was he encouraging her, at the same time giving her the truth of the matter is that, you could die, but I believe, he didn't say I believe, but that's what he was alluding to. There has got to be a reason that God has put you in this position. And I think that may have helped fuel her attitude and, and how she proceeded.
I was thinking kind of the same thing Katie was, that, her initial reaction was, I don't think so. But then, like you said, attitudes can be changed. And especially when we're encouraged by someone else, it gives us that extra strength. And she was able to go on and change her attitude to be more courageous and to be willing to take a stand.
Yes, and keep in mind that part of her attitude changing also came with her devotion to the Lord in requesting that not only was she going to be in fasting and praying, she wanted them to be fasting and praying, because she knew that this wasn't going to get done without God, and she needed to, put her devotion to the Lord first and foremost, and recognized that if anything was going to change, whether it was her attitude or their circumstances, it was only going to be done with the help of the Lord, right? Okay. Any other thoughts on Esther before we move on to Hannah? Okay, Hannah. Hannah was the mother of Samuel. We can read about her story. We're going to read about her story in 1 Samuel 1 and a little bit of 1 Samuel 2. Interesting, Hannah was suffered from infertility, but she was not the first woman in the Bible to suffer from infertility, as you recall. Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel. But unlike some of the other women in the Bible, her attitude was a little bit different about her circumstances. And so Let's read 1 Samuel. I'm just going to breeze through these scriptures really fast, and then we'll talk about them. I'm going to start in 1 Samuel 1, and I'm going to read verses 1 through 7 and verses 10 through 11. Now there was a certain man of Ramathazophim of the mountains of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. And he had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. This man went up from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. And whenever the time came for Elkanah to make an offering, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival also provoked her severely to make her miserable, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it was year by year when she went up to the house of the Lord that she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. So here we have a woman who's infertile, who's clearly loved and adored by his husband, despite the fact that she had given him no children, and his other wife, like the other women in the Bible who were in this same circumstance, was tormented by this woman. She was teased, she was provoked, to the point where, she wept, she couldn't eat. It was just, she was just consumed with grief. So we're going to go to verses 10 to 11. And she, Hannah, was in bitterness of soul and prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. Then she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. Let's go to verses 15 to 16. This is in response to one of the priests there thinking at the temple that she was drunk because she was talking to the Lord. Her lips were moving, but nothing was coming out of her mouth. And so this is her response to him. She says, No, my Lord, I am a woman of sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor intoxicating drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief I have spoken until now. We're going to go to verses 19 to 20 now. Then they rose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord, and returned and came to their house at Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So it came to pass in the process of time that Hannah conceived and bore a son, and called his name Samuel, saying, Because I have asked for him from the Lord. Now let's go to verses 26 through 28. And she said, O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I am the woman who stood by you here, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition, which I asked of him. Therefore, I have also lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall be lent to the Lord. So they worshiped the Lord there. And then let's go over to 1 Samuel 2. And we're going to read verses 1 through 11. And this is sort of this was Hannah's prayer. I'm sure you all are familiar with it, but I want to read it because this is that portrayal of Hannah's attitude and disposition about this whole thing. This is her visible, her attitude visible. My heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. I smile at my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. No one is holy like the Lord, for there is none besides you, nor is there any rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let no arrogance come from your mouth, for the Lord is the God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty men are broken, and those who stumbled are girded with strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, and the hungry have ceased to hunger. Even the barren has borne 7, and she who has many children has become feeble. The Lord kills and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and brings up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and lifts up. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the beggar from the ash heap, to set them among princes and makes them inherit the throne of glory. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he has set the world upon them. He will guard the feet of his saints, but the wicked shall be silent in darkness. For by strength no man shall prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken in pieces. From heaven he will thunder against them. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. Then Elkanah went to his house at Ramah, but the child ministered to the Lord, and the child they're talking about here is Samuel, before Eli the priest. Okay, so here Hannah is, a woman who was barren, who was infertile, who was just completely grieved. She was persecuted by the other wife. And where, unlike Sarah and Rebecca and Rachel, decided to take it in their own hands and try to intervene on their own, in other words, find another way for them to have children. They took it upon themselves to decide, well, I'm going to fix this. Hannah didn't take that attitude. Her attitude was, I'm just going to stay faithful to God. I'm going to pray to God. I'm going to cry out to God and just beg him. She made a promise, which was quite a scary thing to make a promise, because when you make a promise, you need to keep your promises. But she made a promise to God and said, God, if you'll only give me this child, I will give him to you all the days of his life. And so here she has this attitude, this petitionatory attitude. She comes to God humbly, just had this attitude of, I can't do this. The only way that I'm going to have a child is with you. And God hears her cries. He hears her calls. And he grants her prayer. He gives her a child. What does she do? Does she go back to the other wife and say, Nana, 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 look what I've got? Does she hold that child and keep that child and hover over that child? No. What was her attitude after she has this child? What does she do? You tell me, what did she do?
She worships the Lord and she gives the child to the Lord as she had promised. She fulfills her vow to him.
Correct. So is her attitude. Wasn't it her attitude, though, that made a difference? I mean, in her prayer afterwards, she talks about how the Lord delivers to those who are humbled. He gives to those who call on them. And so she was gifted this child because she had an attitude of, putting the Lord first and worshiping him and keeping him first in her life. And so her attitude made the difference, did it not? I mean, if you want to compare her attitude with the other women in the Bible who had the same problem and took matters into their own hands, they took matters into their own hands, got concubines for them to have children through, deceived their husbands to bear a child. And there was chaos, there was conflict. Hannah didn't have any of that, did she? She was given this child, and you're right, she kept her promise to God, and she gave the child back. So if we were going to summarize her attitude, she had an attitude of properly placed hope. Who or what was her hope in?
In God.
It was in God, right? It wasn't in her own doing, or it wasn't in, what somebody else could do for her, what God could do for her. She had trust. She was a promise keeper, right? Wasn't she faithful to her promise to God? She was prayerful, and she was what? After it was all said and done, did she forget God?
She was faithful.
She was faithful. She was grateful. She was grateful. And her attitude was manifested in that gratefulness by keeping her promise. She gave Samuel to the Lord. She praised God for what he had done, thanked the Lord for what he had done, right? God restored her, rescued her, and she remained faithful to God. I don't know how we're doing on time, but we're going to press forward. Any other thoughts on Hannah before we move on?
Yeah, I would
Yes.
like to add that I see also in her some humbleness, because instead of like creating a conflict with this other woman, she just comes and stays quiet. And I don't know, maybe the Bible doesn't record that, but like she doesn't create more conflict. She just stays and receives all that, and she comes to God instead of creating a more or a bigger thing there with the other woman.
Correct.
And I was going to say, oh, go ahead.
I don't know if there's other women here that struggled with infertility, but I did. And so I can really relate to Hannah in that I did have 3 years that I had infertility. And I remember being on my face and praying to God and weeping, asking for him to give me a child. That's what I'd always wanted, to be a Christian mom, and to raise my children to know the Lord. And I didn't understand why I wasn't able to bear a child. And so I remember feeling that way. And we did go on to seek some medical help as well, but always in a prayerful way. And
Correct.
I did have some surgery and then was able to have Crystal, who you met a minute ago, who was singing. So she was the answer to that prayer. And so Hannah's always been a model for me too. Her attitude meant a lot to me as I was going through that.
Katie?
Sorry for the dogs. I was just going to say, I had never noticed that she didn't tell the priest what she was praying about. And I don't know, maybe I did, but that really spoke to me today, because not only did she not cause conflict at home, she didn't go to the temple and cause a lot of conflict or blame or do anything. She just said, dude, I'm hurting. And he didn't even ask her. He just said, God granted, which I don't know. I mean, we know more about him later, but he just said God granted. He didn't even know what she was asking about. And then she kept her promise and blessed so many people.
Yes.
I mean, he became a man who blessed so many people. So
Yes.
that was that I noticed.
Yes. And Brenda hit the nail on the head when she said that she was humble. I think that was the crust of her attitude. She was humbled throughout the whole thing. She was humble when she was being persecuted by the other woman. She was humbled when she went to the temple to pray. She was humble afterwards, after she'd been given this gift. And so, yeah. And
I think one of the reasons that she was maybe infertile was that Samuel had a specific mission and God had a specific time for that mission. And that really helped me too with mine, was that, okay, it's not time yet for this daughter to enter into the world, that he has plans for Crystal and it's not time for her to be here yet, kind of thing. And so I need to wait on his timing.
But isn't it hard? I think we all know that in our heads, but it's very hard to get it in sync with our hearts to know, okay, I know there's a reason why this is happening. And I know that God has a plan, but I'm, but my heart isn't dealing with it as soundly as our heads do, right? At least for me, that's the way it is.
And some women don't have that happy ending. Some women are not able to conceive, and maybe there's an adopted child that needs them, or maybe God's going to use them in a different way than being a mother, but those things are really hard on our hearts, but right. God is there with us.
Right. Well, it looks like we only have about 10 minutes, so I'm kind of going to breeze through because I do want to just mention, I'm hoping that you all are familiar with the story of Paul and his circumstances after he was converted, and what he went through. If you'd like to read the crux of some of the scriptures that I was thinking of in regards to Paul, they would be in 2 Corinthians 4 and in 1 Thessalonians 16, talking about his persecutions when he was in jail, and just the attitude that he had as he was being persecuted, and 2 Corinthians 4, 8-9 says, we're oppressed on every side. We're not crushed. We're perplexed, but we're not driven to despair. We're hunted down, never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we're not destroyed. And so Paul, for me, has always been one that I turn to when I see that my attitude needs to change. He was just, again, very humble. It was all about Jesus with Paul and others. It wasn't about him. And he was devoted, just as devoted as he was to persecuting Christians before he was converted. He was that devoted to the Lord after he became a Christian. And so I would implore you in the moments when you're having a difficult time with your attitude to read the stories of Paul and his attitude. One thing I do want to say before our time is up, and then because I do want to give you guys a couple of minutes if you have questions or anything, is I want to say that as women of God, our attitude can be summed up thusly. In John 14:15, Jesus says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. And the Message version says that if you love me, show it by doing what I've told you. What that means is keeping his commands is indicative of our loving God. It's not the other way around. Our love for God results in obedience. It bears the fruit of obedience when we love God. So in other words, what we do is choose to love God. What comes out of that love is obedience, not the other way around. And so if we can look at it like that, that's how we can see our attitude becomes godly, and it becomes more what God wants. So our attitude is defined and displayed by our love for God. So if we're truly loving God and sowing the fruits of obedience, our attitude will be reflected the way that God would have us. Do you understand where I was going with that? Is that making sense? Yeah, does anybody have any other thoughts or comments about that? We spent a lot of time on the stories, and I wanted to kind of spend more time going into the crux of it all. But if I could say 3 things about this and summarizing these things and the attitudes of these characters that we talked about, I would say that Esther was God's unbending heroine. Hannah took us from pain to joy, and Paul was the consummate encourager. And so those are the attitudes that we need to display as women of God. Humble heroines, taking our pain from joy and knowing how to do that, and then being an encourager. Because I think that when we are encouraging other people, as we saw Mordecai do with Esther, it can make all the difference sometimes in changing not just somebody else's attitude, but our own attitude, especially if we have people in our lives who can be that encouragement for us. Any other thoughts or questions you all might have?
I think one of the hardest parts about attitude is when we see this with all of these characters is it can't be driven by our circumstances. And I think that's so hard. I just think about Hannah, and like, regardless of whether she was getting persecution from the other wife, or whether it was her having to fulfill a vow that was incredibly difficult and a huge sacrifice for her, like, she still maintained a positive attitude. And I struggle with that sometimes, just because when my circumstances begin to fall, it's very hard for my attitude not to fall low. And so I was wondering, maybe you could speak a little bit about how we maintain the joy even amidst the changing circumstance.
It's funny because not too long ago I did a lesson on joy and how to find the joy in all circumstances. For me personally, the key has been to find a blessing, and there's usually more than one, but find a blessing in whatever that circumstance is. Yes, and I didn't struggle with infertility, but I'm using this as an example from a friend of mine who did. She struggled with infertility, but the blessing for her in that time of she had so much to give to others who needed somebody to care for their children, or to mentor a friend's children, or finding the blessing in, I spoke not too long ago about, my best friend here in Colorado that passed away suddenly, and how it just shook me for a loop. And I lost hope. I lost hope in a lot of things. Hope happens to be the name of my girlfriend too, but I had to find some semblance of blessing in her passing. And so I did. I mean, through prayer, through study, through the encouragement of others around me, leading me on, I found blessing in, seeing her children every day. I still had her with me because I would look at her children and I would see her, especially in her daughter. And the memories were such a blessing for me, and it changed my attitude. Once I started focusing more on the blessings in those circumstances, it really helped to unveil the joy again and bring joy back into it. And so then I didn't become sorrowful and grieved every time I thought about Hope because she wasn't here. I found joy in the memories. And so I think if you can take your circumstances and find some blessing, there's always more than one, but at least one blessing in it, that could help. Anybody else?
I think going back to Katie, we're always just right there. So you get to go first this time.
I'm sorry. I can't see you, so I don't know. I can only see her. Thank you. I was just going to say thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that this comes in a really great moment for me because things just change all the time. And so trying to hold on to that joy and find something. The being thankful has definitely been something. I read the 1,000 Gifts or whatever, the book, and about being thankful. And I love the part Jesus was thankful before the miracles. I love that part. I think the thing for me is sometimes it's just holding to the rock and just saying, and I don't do a great job of it. I'm a pretty emotional, reactive person. And I feel really encouraged by what you said. And I think that for me, the thing is, holding on to that hope, like you said, but let it be the true hope that shines through the true blessings, not just the blessings that I want it to be, right, or that I think it should be.
So I was going to say, I think remembering the golden rule sometimes helps me to, sometimes I just want to talk bad about someone that's irritated me. And I think I have to remember, I don't want them talking that way about me, I was in an airport the other day and having to wait for a while for my flight. And there was a kiosk and it had a bunch of shirts that said, "Do good to people." And I said, "Oh, I really like that." And so I bought one, and I hadn't gone 100 yards before it started a conversation. Someone said, "Oh, I really like your shirt. Where'd you get that?" And I was able to start a conversation with someone. Yeah, we all need a little encouragement during this time, kind of thing. And I walked another 200 yards and got in another conversation. I mean, it just was amazing how it sparked smiles and conversations, just by saying, let's be good to each other, and so kind of that idea of treating others the way you want to be treated.
And I hate to cut you off, but I think we're down to our last 30 seconds, lady. So I have enjoyed having you here. if you want to continue this discussion further, feel free to email me or chat or whatever. I'm happy to be of any encouragement I can, or, you know, and I'm sure I'll get something from you. So thank you for allowing me this time to share with you.
Thank
I
you.
have really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Kat.